All right, we will start. Let me know if I will be sharing my screen right now. 1 second. Yeah, so let me know if you can see it. You can type plus in the chat on Zoom, just for me to understand that video and audio is all right and screen sharing is all right as well. We will try to add some more interactions in this webinar. So I will essentially tell about the topic of the webinar a bit later, start with the intros. The topic is obviously the one that you saw on the website. I will start with the intro. We're Interexy, we're a 150 engineers company. We're headquartered in Florida. We have the office in Dubai, where I am at currently. And we have development centers in Eastern Europe, countries like Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. We have people in Georgia, in Portugal, in Turkey, essentially around Europe as well. We initially started as an app development agency. After the pandemic started, we switched to healthcare. We've done a lot of projects in healthcare, and we're still doing a lot of projects in healthcare, specifically in telemedicine, because telemedicine was blocked before the pandemic as it was illegal to provide any diagnosis on the video call. After the pandemic, obviously this block was lifted. And then we essentially went into blockchain. I would say around 1.5 2 years ago at this stage. We were doing some stuff with blockchain projects beforehand, but I would say it was like a smaller percentage of our portfolio, and heavily we went into 1.5 to 2 years ago. Essentially, I've done a range of NFT drops and a range of custom development projects as well, ranging from real estate tokenization projects and custom systems involved with a bunch of security in healthcare and some other industries, and in some simple stuff as essential NFT drops, some smart contracts and things like that. We grow at least 3 times each year, except the last one. So yeah. We have recent clients who had operated plus agency and Upwork, so I think the team would be sharing all the links. For mine and why I'm qualified to speak on the topic, I'm initially an iOS engineer, so I used to develop applications for iOS. Then essentially we started the company. Right now I'm the CEO and co-founder of Interexy. On top of that, I have a part in different businesses related to blockchain and Web3. The main one is with media, and I essentially know the industry from the investments from different businesses, different people who are in the niche as well. Myself, I'm investing into blockchain, and yes, I have like a couple of things on the side that I essentially do, but the main thing is Interexy. A lot of work here as well, and a lot of things, a lot of new interesting stuff that we work on and figure out with blockchain on a daily basis. We do train engineers, we do hire engineers, get people from the market. We essentially train existing engineers who are in the team as well, so they can learn how to write smart contracts and do custom blockchain projects. And we've been working with companies like Sandbox, with Chainlink. We've been working with some influencers and stars in the US on their NFT drops and some other companies. So definitely a lot of experience there. We have Domi on the call with us as well, who's one of our blockchain tech leads. He's also based in Dubai. Domi.
Hi guys, hi everyone. I'll do a little intro about myself. My name is Domi. I'm originally from Hungary, but I currently live in Dubai in the UAE. I'm a blockchain developer. I write smart contracts and architect projects to make sure the actual contracts work as intended. In this call, I'll be taking care of some of the more technical elaborations on how to use blockchain technology and what are the sort of things to avoid during the development process.
Thank you, Domi. Thank you for the intro. So main topics, we basically have 3 of them: why and how implement blockchain into your business, and if the business essentially needs that, and what type of businesses can benefit from implementation with blockchain technology. It's a very broad topic, but we essentially will try to narrow it down and essentially share some examples from real case studies that we have inside the company. Steps to implement blockchain technology from the business point of view. And from tech point of view, and mistakes to avoid during the process, that's mostly from tech point of view. That's something that Domi would be covering from his end. So the first part is how to implement blockchain to power up your business. It consists from 4 different topics, which are what are the businesses that can benefit from Web3 right now, how to monetize and how to make sure it would actually make money and not lose money, how to evaluate if your business can benefit, and testing and raising opportunities. So I would start with the first one, which is what are the businesses that can benefit from Web3 right now? It's a very interesting and broad topic because essentially there is definitely a framework inside the niche that can show you exactly what type of businesses can benefit from there. And the easiest thing, the most straightforward thing is basically standardization and removal of the middleman on high enough volume of transactions. So you can think of any platform that right now in the Web2 world works as mediator between transactions. And most likely you would be able to develop a Web3 version of that. If we're speaking of the development of the custom blockchain product from scratch, where you can basically replace the need in the middleman by clear standardization of everything within smart contracts. You would probably need to hire someone to do certain mitigations here and there. But if the rules are well defined, or if it's a purely Web3 platform where people would like to stay true to blockchain and be anonymous and things like that, you can really automate a lot of the processes in terms of the need of the middleman.
1,000 more issues.
Essentially, because of that, you would have an option to optimize a lot of things in the process, and you can charge the middleman fee, a lower one, but still good enough as well. So one of the examples of that, which is a very hot topic right now, between the venture funds, between the billionaires even, and people who own a lot of real estate, is essentially tokenization of real estate in the first place, and secondly, development of the platform, the marketplaces, where essentially you can buy and sell tokenization of real estate. Essentially, you can sell your assets in the form of tokens, and the assets are essentially real estate that you own. We are ourselves in discussions with governments right now on implementation of the system like that. And we've been working with a range of startups who are essentially in the niche as well. And Indian government, for example, they've announced recently that they're working on the tokenization of real estate in India, certain part of the market with Algorand, which is one of the strongest essentially labs in blockchain technologies out there. It's a very interesting thing because with essential implementation of the platform like this, with technology like this, you open up a lot of liquidity, you speed up the transactions, you decrease the transactions cost, and essentially middleman that is in the process of buying and selling real estate currently, they really charge a lot, and they huge overhead for each part of the process essentially. And by standardizing and digitalizing this part of this industry essentially, you can definitely generate a very nice stream of income. I would say the main issue with the initiatives like that currently is the legal one, and this is the main issue that we hear from potential clients on working on something like this, because the party that has I would say mostly figured this part out from the law and from the legal point of view, they're basically the closest to implement this type of solution. And that's why we will actually see a lot of interest from the governments. But it's pretty interesting from the governments because they also want to keep things centralized at the same time. So it's very, very interesting how the implementation essentially go. Some others industries and businesses that can benefit, one of them is media type of businesses, where essentially you have a certain community, you have influencers, and you have people who are fans of certain things. It might be a game, it might be some type of influencer. It might be even a B2C type of product where you have a very, very strong brand with a very, very strong community inside. And one of the things that you can do with Web3 and blockchain is essentially implement the token inside the community to be able to reward the most active users of the product, most active users in the ecosystem, add a lot of gamification in the process. So I would say the core implementation of this part is re-implementation of the loyalty programs and essentially transition of loyalty programs from Web 2 to Web 3. It definitely introduces a lot of complexity into the process as well, but at the same time, it adds more benefits to your customers and to your users to actually be buying and using the service and being like a loyal fan of the whole thing and essentially bring you more sales in the process as well. So it's a very, very interesting niche essentially to check on. And that's why we see a lot of influencers, a lot of artists that are doing their own NFT drops. That's basically just the part of the puzzle. I would say it's like a smaller one, but it's just the one that you can implement easily and you can test out easily as well. Other things is the implementation of the tokenomics and essentially doing their own token. And we see it from some of them, and there are platforms like right now that are offering something like this. Others, for example, they basically pack this into the metaverses, they do some concerts into the metaverse, some events, and they can add a lot of things on top and they can add some additional products. So it can even like be a separate additional stream of revenue, which for the artist would be automated from a certain point of view. Second thing is healthcare. So in healthcare, you have a lot of issues with compliances and securities as well. And implementations that we've been doing, they are mostly we're doing in essentially in private-owned businesses, because with governmental organizations in healthcare, it's a bit slow right now from the blockchain point of view. But with the pandemic, essentially a lot of healthcare businesses, they started to innovate heavily in different directions. So it's not only about telemedicine, but overall innovation of the whole things. And some systems that we were doing, they were essentially about the implementation of blockchain technology to streamline, speed up the process of internal data flows with patients and things like that, and also increase in the security and how the whole, essentially, it was like a transferage of existing system that, for example, the healthcare business clinic was using to blockchain to improve the security, improve the speed of transactions, decentralize, remove human error, and speed up the whole process so they can speed up certain business processes inside their businesses as well to either make more revenue or save on the costs. The other thing is government. So it's a very interesting one because there are some innovative governments in the world who are looking to implement this technology. The ones that we're speaking to, the government from India, I mentioned that they're doing a real estate optimization project on the blockchain. There are rumors that some governments, like right as we speak, they use part of blockchain technologies as the part of their internal ecosystem. So they have already implemented it and they're already running their papers inside different government organizations on the blockchain. These are just rumors that are being spreaded in the community, but that's definitely something to think on, as even governments are essentially at this stage to do that. So other things, essentially, the examples that I've mentioned initially, where you have different parties, let's say you have two parties and you have certain type of mediator. So for example, we had cases where we were working with organizations with hotels that used to sell essentially their rooms and certain things essentially internally to optimize and speed up the process with the implementation of blockchain and NFTs, and essentially raise some more funds in advance so they can spend them and they can have a more stable cash flow, because for certain locations, hotels, they're very seasonal business. And it was also an interesting way of implementation of loyalty program. I'm specifically not going into the details. I'm sharing everything high level. We might have an option to have a discussion on this a bit closer if with some of you will be on the call or something. But there are reasons of why I'm essentially sharing this on the high level as well. The other things is if you would think of Upwork, which is a freelancing marketplace, it's a very stable and very old type of relationship where you have the client and you have the service provider, and there are some things sometimes happening with the mediation of them, a relationship, completion of the work and things like that. And if you would standardize something like this for smart contract, and if you can implement essentially something like this, you can definitely speed up the whole thing, increase the speed of transactions on the platform as well, increase trust on the platform because there will be no middleman, and there will be a standardized type of communication between these two entities, which would also add more trust into the process, which would also increase the volume of transactions, which will eventually help you to market better as the competition, because in this specific niche where everything is standardized and everything is clear, it's more trust from the end of the client, it's more trust from the end of the service provider, it's more transactions. So overall, might be a very nice and interesting business model to run and scale, as you would probably beat the competition, at least in your niche. So yeah, I would say that's everything in terms of the business models that I wanted to share. Obviously, we have some more cases in different niches and different industries as well, but my goal was to share the framework. And framework is like very default case is removal and automation, speeding up of the middleman, and transition of the loyalty programs. I would say those are like two main cases that we're seeing currently, and each and every one of them, which are essentially different from these two cases, you could probably be able to tie up to these first two cases. For example, if we are speaking of the NFT drop for the influencer, you can tie this up to loyalty program. If someone had developed a certain API for Web3 technology for the engineers to speed up the processes, and they sell the API for the usage, we can kind of tie up to removal of the middleman and automation of certain things inside the business as well. So the second part is how to evaluate if your business can benefit from it. If, by the way, if you have some more examples of implementation of Web3 or blockchain technology, feel free to type them in the chat as well. It would be very interesting to see them and essentially have a discussion on them. Or if you have any questions about this topic, feel free to mention this as well. So it's a very interesting process that should be applied very carefully, because there were not been a lot of, I would say, viable examples of profitable transitions from Web 2 to Web 3. There are some on the marketplace, but obviously in terms of success and failure rates, as with any type of startups, because this type of initiative, even in established business, it might be like a startup and it might be funded from the budget of innovation department of the company. They definitely have the failure rate, but if you would do it properly, that's going to be a different type of game, and you will probably, just a second, you will probably differentiate yourself for competition for quite some time. So first of all, in terms of the evaluation and things, the main thing is to think about the cash flow, because in some businesses you can actually kill cash flow by implementation of Web3 and blockchain, because you decentralized the transactions. And in some cases, the source of your cash flow might be from you essentially being the main seller for the service. You might not be the ecosystem. You might not have this volume and this type of business that can essentially benefit from the integration. I would share some specific examples on this later, but it's very important to really understand the sources of your cash flow and essentially make sure that you won't be killing them with the implementation of the blockchain, because it definitely have its own interesting aspects in terms of the implementation and other things like that. Speaking of the monetization model, I would also essentially share some of them later on the webinar as well. Some of them I've already partially mentioned. The easiest one, and which essentially the blockchain technology by itself, it runs on this model as well, because each transaction on the blockchain costs some, and often these blockchains, they take some of these costs to themselves to fund the development teams. And it's kind of like these SaaS businesses where you're using something, you're paying to use something, but you're paying very, very little, especially in comparison of transferring money, for example, from one bank to another, especially if you're transferring on different continents. So this is definitely another topic. In terms of the strategy of monetization, you should definitely also very carefully check on it and make sure that the thing that you're trying to implement is viable and this would work. I would also tell a bit later in terms of how we can test if the solution essentially is going to work, and how to make sure that you won't be losing a lot of money on essentially building and implementing the solution just to find out that it's not going to work. Yeah, once you basically have the proof that the solution is going to generate revenue, the best thing, if you have some competition on the market that made it working for them, that's usually going to be a good sign. However, each business is different, even if you're in the same niche. So it's a very interesting point as well. Innovation requirement. That's a very, very interesting point, because innovation won't only be required from the end of your team, from the end of people who are in operations heavily and they're doing day-to-day work daily. It's also going to be required from the end of your customers. And it's an interesting topic essentially because with innovation to Web3 and blockchain, you would get a certain client base from Web3 and blockchain audience itself. And it might be a very, very nice idea to innovate at the start of the next bull market cycle, as you would essentially go through with your innovation and part of the business through the whole like stage of the market. So you would essentially get the most out of it in terms of new audience, people, and things like that. But you would also have to innovate on the people who would run the operations for this type of the business. So these are the costs that are often neglected by business owners, and they should definitely be included into the equation in terms of like planning to implement the solution like this. And yeah, pivot to Web3 audience. I partially touched this point as well, but it might be a very, very nice additional source of revenue, as even people who are not from your industry, and even people sometimes that don't need your product, if they're from Web3, they might be buying some with the investment opportunity in the heads, but it's also very risky type of clients, because essentially they won't stick with you long term, probably. So if we would move a bit forward on this exact monetization and things like that. So in terms of the monetization models, I would say most of them, they're basically just coming from Web2 type of things. So Web2 products, everything that you can think of, I would say it's the same thing. You just have certain additional things in place. So several cases that I've mentioned. The first one is basic fee for the transactions on the service. Many businesses, I would say many ecosystems, they run like this right now. But the best way to approach this is to enter the ecosystems that don't have much of digitalization at this stage, as buying and selling real estate assets, put it into the Web3, because in this case, you would be able to charge way more than this like smaller percentage from each transaction, because it would still be more beneficial for buyers and sellers to be on your platform. And at the same time, it essentially would increase the volume as well. So even if you would be charging lower as you're opening more liquidity into the market, you would be able to charge more from that, as essentially default non-digitalized real estate type of businesses. Subscription for usage. So it's basically a fee for access. There are a bunch of Web3 initiatives and businesses that are running in something like this as well. And it's a very standard model for Web2. So it's either a monthly subscription, which kind of transfers you into a SaaS, and which is very, very lucrative and interesting for investors, because if it's a software product and you don't have like any type of overhead, so basically it's just marketing, it's just developers and marketing, it's very easy to scale if essentially the model of acquisition of users is ready and figure out and test it as well. On top of that, if you are in Web3 with something like this, you would have access to new audience. You would have options to fundraise from the public, which is a huge benefit of Web3 and blockchain right now, and it's going to be for many, many years ahead. And I would also tell a bit more about this a bit later on the webinar as well. Minting of the NFT. So I would say this is the business model that was introduced recently, essentially around 1.5 2 years ago. And it might be treated as a new business model, because this is something that you can use to monetize the community of the product fast. If you were checking any type of NFT launches, NFT drops, they're heavily focusing on building the community. They do not focus even much on essentially cold traffic, on launching an NFT drop and try to get some cold traffic to buy it. They create communities, they nurture communities for some time. They create very, very intensive teasing marketing campaigns for 1.5 2 weeks for the community, and then they open the sale, and then they if everything was done properly, they basically just sell the whole thing. And you've probably seen a bunch of artists, a bunch of influencers, bunch of pretty large businesses essentially launching their own NFT drops. And I would say for any type of brand, it makes sense to launch NFT drops. And I think in the next stage of the bull market, probably after it, we would see a lot of businesses wanting to launch NFTs as additional way to monetize the clients. But, and this would be the businesses that would probably benefit from this the most, the ones who would be transferring their loyal programs into Web3 with NFTs, and probably with tokens on top of that, with additional functionalities and new things essentially. Flashing your current monetization model and risks of that. Yeah, so this is something that I mentioned about the cash flow. There are some products in Web2 space, and I would say generally in businesses that are not connected to software, that have certain things of why they're acquiring the cash flow, why they have cash flow inside the businesses. And essentially, sometimes the implementation of Web3 technology can flash this cash flow out or change it. But sometimes in terms of the change, essentially the end result might become smaller than it was initially, because there are some different things at play there that were not planned beforehand. So the case of Titan Arena, that's essentially a play-turn game, which was developed by a company, I think out of Vietnam, and they've done it around the end of last year. No, around the end of 2021. At the same time, this company is a pretty successful Web2 company. So they have their own mobile product. They're selling items in the mobile game into mobile game, like gems and things like that, and they're monetizing through this. So they've tried to went into Web3. They developed this Web3 product. They've raised a lot in the process, especially from the market as well, from public investors. But what basically happened is that they were not able to solve as many play turn titles. They were not able to solve the inflation problem and the problem of tokens going to zero after some time for different essentially reasons in play turn games. Now, the main ones is the condition of the market. The market is up, everything goes up. The market is down, everything goes down. And the second thing, there are these gaming guilds. So basically, these are people that abuse any glitch and any issue in the play turn system inside any game, inside any ecosystem, to make some more tokens and more money in the process. Like right now, they don't care about people essentially being long-term playing the game and things like that. And when you have this money aspect inside it, inside the ecosystem, it's a different level of essentially things that people implement and do to try to abuse the system. And that's essentially why at the start of the webinar, I mentioned that if you are part of some media business and you would want to implement a loyal system with tokens and tokenomics, you should be very, very careful on that, because there might be some parties that would just acquire most of it, manipulate on it, and just cash out on everyone who's participation in the whole thing. And there are many projects in Playturn especially that are trying to solve this inflation essentially issue. So yeah, solving the inflation issues, I would say that's essentially one of the main things. And specifically Web3 products and projects and platforms, they specifically hire people to keep track on that. They hire analytics to on a daily basis essentially check if everything works properly and if they won't have any issues. But these things happen because even with default economics, there are always people that are abusing the system and making money of it. I would say the best thing here is to become as this large that you essentially won't care about these things. So if you have any additional monetization models that I didn't mention, feel free to essentially type them on the chat as well. And we'll have an option to discuss them in the Q&A section of the webinar. Then we have testing and raising opportunities. I would say this part is mostly about how to figure out that the solution, the transition that you would be planning is not something that just going to waste a bunch of money and time, that would actually be beneficial for the whole business. And one of the interesting things is, even if the initiative would fail, you would still have an option to raise from the public to continue certain developments. If you essentially have a brand already and have a community, have clients and things like that. There are some questions about it because many people, they're still not looking into blockchain as something they can trust and things like that, but that essentially depends on the client, and that depends on what type of product, what type of service you're providing as well. Innovation requirement in connection with raising. Yeah, so you would have to prove to your audience that you're working on the money that you've raised, and you would have to work on the promise, which is the point 3. In case where you obviously want to raise after and things like that. Unfortunately, as we do not have a lot of regulation in the niche right now, and a lot of people, they're just trying to cash out of the initiatives that they launch. We had a lot of cases last year and 1.5 years ago where people were basically just raising funds on NFT drops, launching the sales, and then getting away with the funds and not following on the promises that they provided to the community. Things like that happen, but if you're running already like Web2 business or basically a default business like some e-commerce or things like that, where you would want to implement parts of the functionalities as loyalty program and the customers know you and can then go into refund anywhere, that might be beneficial essentially. For the B2C brands, for B2C type of businesses, if you sell something to end consumers, you would often have an option to raise from them in Web3 if they are familiar with the niche to launch some initiatives in the business. So it's a very, very nice fundraising opportunity because once you succeed, the clients of the service that believed in you, they would also be able to make some money on it to cash out because they've basically invested in your tokens, in your concept, in your idea. So essentially, it's a constant. It might turn to a constant process where you're raising funds on something, you're implementing the initiatives, it works, the token goes up in value, and you have more money. You can work on something else, and essentially it continues till the point where market changes, or for example, where you fail with one of your initiatives, but obviously most loyal people, they would still stay with you. Test before pivot and integration. I would cover this part in the next slide as well. Very, very important. It's still something very, very new. And it's always great to check and see if there are some businesses that basically benefited from it already and that are in the same niche as you. And then look into that, talk with consultants and see if this is something you can implement. And one thing I think I didn't mention is I also do not think that something like this would work for like very, very small businesses. I would say it's for mid and large size and enterprises because you definitely need enough volume to do a transition like that and do an integration like that as well. And sometimes you would want to have this part of this innovation budget inside the company to spend on the initiatives like that and kind of not feel it if it won't succeed as well. But I would say it's not from the point of view that it will be a fail, but from the point of view where you can test things more freely. You can be more agile in the process. You can pivot. You can adapt to the market and develop more in the faster time frame as well. Steps to implement blockchain technology from the business point of view. Then I will pass this to Domi from the tech point of view. So we essentially have 5 things here: evaluate, test, plan, iterate, integration, strategize, and grow. Evaluate. I mentioned this range of times as well. If something that I've mentioned here essentially stuck in your head that like my type of business is similar to businesses that Stan basically mentioned, and we might benefit from implementation of some type of loyalty program, or we can speed up some transactions, or we have some issues with security we can solve with decentralization and things like that. If you're not very, very deep in the industry, I would say that you should probably read a bit more and research yourself, or maybe have someone in the team do research, do the research. And once you would be moving closer to consideration stage and then the decision stage, you essentially might start speaking with consultants. And usually the best people would be people who had experience with doing something similar to your type of businesses, with implementation of Web3 and blockchain. And the best thing, obviously, if they have successful case studies, but the market is also pretty young as well. And there are some interesting bets that you can do in terms of that, because if you would position yourself as a Web3 type of company, or basically do some certain transfer into blockchain technology before the start of the bull market, you can also cash out pretty nicely on the initiatives, be able to raise once the market would go up. But obviously it's something, it's a more sophisticated strategy. And if it's basically just first time where you're hearing about something like this, that probably won't be the best case. Test. So try to mock the blockchain environment. try to mock the business model that you would have once you would have blockchain implemented. Try to mock the transactions and cash flow and source of revenue that you would essentially be having with the implementation of the system like that. If it's a pivot to a full like certain business model or a part of the business into new business model, it's always great because you can always set up some things often without the need to even like develop something, just get some test users, just spend some money and try to basically allocate the budget where you're doing a pivot. Where you're doing a test, and based on the results of the test, make sure if this is something you would want to scale from your end. So it's basically a default process with any type of initiatives here. I'm just sharing from the experience that blockchain environment and blockchain monetization model can still be essentially tested and mocked. And based on the results from them, you would be able to assess if this is something that you would want to do or not. Plan. So this is something that I would strongly suggest to do with the team of consultants that were doing these type of projects before. And this is essentially already the decision stage of the whole thing. So after the test, you make sure that this is something you would want to test, to implement, to scale out this smaller version that you've tested with the audience. And here, yeah, definitely speak with consultants, usually different ones, usually ones that understand your niche, and get essentially feedback solutions from them, what they can do, and things like that, and plan out the exact implementations and plan out carefully from your end, from the business side as well, in terms of what kind of things you accept. Where is this top loss point? Because there are many initiatives that you start, and then you start to really love the initiative and you don't want to cancel it except it fails in the real time. So I definitely think that there should be a clear stop loss, that after several pivots, after several tries of essentially trying to figure things out, you make sure that probably this is not something that would work at this stage. Maybe you can essentially leave it for later, because still, if we are speaking not about the optimization of the cost inside the business, but more about generation of new revenue, it's still very, very market dependent. It might work not dependent on the market as well, but in general, if the market is up, it would be working better. If the market is down, it would be working not so good. But right now is a great time to build, because once everything is going to be up, it would be crazy prices from the service providers, from blockchain engineers, consultants. I know people that were charging 20K an hour in the last NFT bull run for 1 hour consultation on marketing of the NFT drop, which is pretty interesting. Part number 4 is iterative integration. So step by step, carefully following the plan that you have already. And the best thing is that in the process, you would be getting a certain version of transition that you can already test with the test audience, or maybe with real audience. You can implement some type of A/B test, and where, for example, for like 10 or 15% of certain type of users on your website, you're shown this functionality with Web3 implementation, and see how it essentially work for them. And I'm definitely a fan of making decisions during the iteration as well. So not just basically like, let's do the integration 600K, let's do the whole thing and test it out. Let's split it into the different setups. Let's test it one by one, and at each given step, make sure if we make a decision if we essentially scale it or if we kill it. Step number 5, strategize and grow. I would say that's definitely a very interesting and important part to be in, because probably at this stage you figure out that transition works for you, generating revenue. It can be scaled. If it's even not a positive cash flow, you can still see that it might be interesting for fundraising, or you fundraised already, so it might be interesting to keep working on it, and you see the point where it becomes profitable as well. So at that stage, probably you would start seeing competition trying to get heavily in something that you've built, if you're obviously the first one. who's implementing something like this in the process. And I think it's essentially a standard process for any business owner to grow the whole thing as well. And yeah, if you have any questions about the process, feel free to mention them in the chat. And this is part 3 of the webinar, steps to implement blockchain technology from the tech point of view and mistakes to avoid during the process. I'm passing this to Domi.
Thank you, Stan. So let's talk a bit about more of the technical sides on how to properly implement blockchain technology into an application from end to end. And I'm also going to talk about some of the mistakes I'd recommend all of you to avoid during this process. So I'm going to tell you a very simple 7-step process in order to properly build very scalable and well-working dApps in today's world. So as a first things first, it's very important to identify and understand how blockchain technology works. That means understanding that it doesn't really matter what you do. After you've purchased your contracts, there's not a lot you can do once you've changed it. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is cross-chain interoperability is still very, very far. You can do it, but it's probably not going to be the best solution. And number 3, blockchain world, like on-chain world, is very, very different from off-chain world. And it's also very, very important to make sure all your clients understand that, because even very, very simple things could end up taking the actual development team hours, days, or weeks to implement properly on blockchain technology. I'll give you an example, just simple random, like proper randomness. It's a lot more complicated to do it properly in a scalable manner than you guys would think so. For that, you'd probably need an oracle or do some pretty complex hashing between contracts. So the first things first is to outline the entire project from end to end. Just literally bullet point list everything you're planning the project to do on your initial launch. And then once you've done that, you should identify the sections that are in need of blockchain technology. So your entire project doesn't need to be on the blockchain. That's a waste of blockchain space. It's a waste of money for you, for your clients, and your users who are going to use the app. So only put the sections of your app on the blockchain that are meant to be on the blockchain. Blockchain technology is really, really good, but it is a very, I wouldn't say niche, but it's a gray area. So you need to make sure that you're only putting the parts on there that are meant to be on there. Then once you've done that, so you have your bullet points, you circle the ones that should be on chain. And now you need to identify some of the future upgrades which you would plan to do in the future, just on a very high level. It doesn't need to be specific, but once you know that, you'll be able to see which ones are the things that are scalable, you can scale them in the future, and which ones are the parts you cannot. And now the next thing we do is to identify the proper tooling needed to develop this. In 2023, there are actually a lot of tools available for blockchain technology in order to develop it. There are loads. You can do a lot of things nowadays. You can get a lot far just from using Hardhat on its own. You can fork ETH onto your local net, and then you can have full access onto blockchain development environment locally. You can set a lot of things on it, customize block speed. You can test on it very, very easily. So a lot of firms still build blockchain tech like how you're supposed to build it 4 or 5 years ago. But now the actual tooling is a lot farther than most of you think. So once you've identified all the tooling that you need, allocate the resources efficiently, and start building the actual dApp. Now building it, if it's a complex protocol, for example, it is much better if you have less developers on it than more. Because if it's a complex protocol, then it's most likely just a math thing. And in my experience, whenever you have multiple people trying to work on the same thing, they'll all try to implement their own methods, and it will usually end up in a mess in the end. And when you get to the testing stage, nobody will know what the other person's code does properly, and then you'll probably mess up the testing stage. So if you do have quite a lot of developers on it, then definitely allocate very, very specific sections for each developer to make sure they are able to test that section on their own. Then once you've built the actual app, the most time-consuming part comes, the actual optimization. Since one of the reasons why most contracts are really, really optimized and much more optimized than any other application out there is because Ethereum is very, very expensive. Therefore, it's very, very rewarding to spend hours and hours and hours and days on top of each other to optimize your contract. Once you've done your contract, you can probably 2 or 3 times optimize that and get it to a lot cheaper. And usually the cheaper your protocol is, the more people end up using it. So this expense actually forces developers to work a lot harder than they should. And this results in a lot better protocol. So it's definitely worth to optimize the app. When you're doing the optimization, that should be before you've built your tests. So in my case, what I usually like to do is use the red, green, red kind of rule, to build a contract. So first you build, it's kind of like test-driven development. This is very useful in case of a protocol. So first you build your tests and outline how it should function. Because usually protocols are like a little state machine, just on a very high level, like a state machine. So, and it's very, very easy to test state machines. So you write all your tests and all of them will come out as failed. All of them are red. Then you'll implement your contract, your protocol, the way that all your tests will become green. Then once you do that, you start optimizing it and make sure everything stays green. The reason why you should write your tests first, while test-driven development is usually a good idea in protocols and other on-chain products, is because you will probably be very biased once you've written the actual contract yourself. So once you've written it as the developer, you'll be very biased in your developed outcomes, and then you'll be writing the tests for the contract, which means you'll probably miss something. So it's a better, in my experience, it's a much better idea to first write down the tests before you've written it, the entire contract, and then build the contract to make sure it passes all of those tests. Once you all of that, if it's a big project, then it's probably a good idea to audit it either by another developer or by another developer firm. Audits usually take quite a long time. Even a quick audit can take about a week or two. Now, one of the few mistakes that I see during the process is that, first of all, people start using blockchain tech just for the sake of using blockchain tech, which could be okay, but it won't only make it very expensive and a long time to develop, but it will make the actual app and user experience a lot worse. As I said in the first step, identify the actual parts that do need to be on the blockchain and only put those ones there. Those ones will benefit from being on the blockchain, but if you put everything there, then the whole app will become very clunky, hard to scale, and it'll usually backfire if you get way too many users and the protocol becomes very popular. Another mistake that could happen is not identifying what are the things you could like to do in the future. So contracts can be upgradable, not a whole lot, but you can do basic upgrades. You can do contract splitting, which means, for example, let me give you an easy example. You have NFT staking. Then if you split your staking contracts from your actual NFT contract, then you can upgrade the staking one whenever you want to, because it's not part of the actual token contract. Therefore, once you upgrade it, everyone's funds are still intact and nothing has changed. But all this should be identified beforehand. Redeploying is risky, it could be done, but I'd usually not recommend it. Another pitfall could be just simply not testing or not ordering properly. There should be no reason not to test more. You will always, I've never not run a test. I haven't found anything on it. You can always optimize something. You usually just run out of time. And lack of optimization can definitely lead to the fall in popularity of your DApp. As I said, if it's expensive, then your DApp will usually gain users in bull market. In bull market, coins go up, therefore it just gets more and more expensive. And if it is too expensive, then users will just go with a cheaper alternative. That's what I prepared.
All right, thank you, Domi. Very interesting point on ETH and improvement of the tools and essentially development strategies 5-6 years ago and now. All right, so we have last section of the webinar, which is Q&A. Before that, I would like to mention about the referral program that we have for Interexy right now. If you would essentially bring someone who has a project, and we will be starting the project with this person, we are ready to essentially pay 10% of the project lifetime. That's basically just something that we're doing inside the agency, something I wanted to mention. In terms of the Q&A, feel free to send questions on the chat. At the same time, you can use emotions on Zoom and basically raise your hands so I can see, and essentially we will have a host of the webinar to talk. So yeah, feel free to ask questions if you have any at this stage. anything about business models, monetization, about our experience case studies, because I definitely didn't share everything. That we are working on. All right, we will wait for 1-2 minutes. If you will have any questions, what businesses are ideal for this? That's very interesting. I would say the most ones that you've seen and that we've seen market proved brands. So some people say that there's basically only one viable business model in crypto overall right now, which is exchange, which is kind of partially true, but we definitely have seen a lot of innovation in the niche with the introduction of NFTs and essentially with the bull market of 2021, start of 2022. I would say most ideal case that probably generated most of the revenue, except exchanges, of course, because we have giants like Binance, and we had this case with FTX, the guys were doing a lot of money, is probably brands for existing businesses. But you obviously have a lot of funds, a lot of algo trading people that are essentially in the money management. And there are some very, very well like businesses with very, very nice setup in terms of the cash flow there as well. But I would say these parts, they are more like about money, about trading and things like that. If we would be speaking of businesses that generate cash flow and revenue from selling some products or services, things like that, I would say that would be brands. They probably benefited the most in the last 1.5-2 years from essentially having NFTs. Under in coin trading, would you please provide an example of a use case in business where BC is a good solution to consider blockchain? So yeah, so several cases that we've been working on, several cases that I've basically mentioned, things where you remove a middleman, speed up the transaction, increase the volume, and then you can charge for the increased volume. And essentially for having a system like this, a straightforward example is the tokenization of real estate, and essentially a marketplace to buy and sell tokens, to buy and sell real estate in a way of tokenized NFTs. There are not many solutions that are live on the market that are working properly, I would say, right now, like this. There are some, but there are a bunch of them being developed like right now in different jurisdictions and in different countries. So basically any type of solutions we can standardize the communication with the middleman and speed them up. And some things, if we're speaking about the generation of revenue. So for example, some businesses that are connected to media, brands, so it's B2C, so the consumer is essentially the end buyer of the product. You can implement loyalty systems with Web3 to essentially increase the amount of transactions and volume inside the ecosystem as well. Decentralize it a bit, which might change your business model in some ways, but it might also generate a very, very nice additional stream of income. If we're speaking of things where you can optimize the business processes inside any business, that would be about security, decentralization, and benefits that decentralization essentially adds into the process, which is removal of human error and things like that. Default example for the healthcare, for example, if we implement something secure and something fast and something decentralized, we remove the human error. We basically speed up the whole thing. We add more trust, which increase the volume of transactions for them and increase the success of the transactions for them as well, because everything is faster, more stable, and more secure as well. How's blockchain used in branding? Where does the cash flow go to and from to make it profitable? So they're basically, I would say it's more about utilization of the communities that brands have, and essentially adding this Web3 and blockchain type of setup with the tokenomics, with basically either implementation of NFTs and some type of loyalty systems into there. So, for example, you probably know Gary Vee, who's opened a restaurant in New York where only people can essentially go in, the ones that have NFTs. So I would say it's very, very interesting example. But in terms of the default type of setup, in terms of brands and communities, you implement tokens there, you introduce the tokenomics, you implement the reward system where people can get rewards and tokens from certain activities, like being active in communities, helping other people, buying certain products that adds them like more benefits, and basically on top of that, you can build a very, very nice gamification process, which would probably increase the amount of purchases from you. And at the same time, it would also create a second market, but more standardized, because people won't sell your stuff like on different other like websites and everything. They would probably be selling them on your second market, because it will only be the market where they're getting benefits. So you can kind of bring all this traffic back to you, and you would still get transactions from it, because if it's on your marketplace, then you can charge a percentage. You can still reward people in tokens that they're doing something on your basically second hands or third party marketplace, which is also pretty interesting, because if you're selling product, you can bring back certain revenue flows and improve loyalty system, and essentially following certain research for most B2C businesses, most of the revenue is coming from repeat purchases from existing clients. So it can really boost revenue over long enough time frame, and if you work in it. And of course, you would need to plan the system very, very carefully to make sure that abuses are not something that can be created, and if they are fixed quickly as well. Regarding healthcare industry and thinking about scalability, what is a piece of data you would store in the blockchain? Would it be transaction ID based on action or timestamp? So this is something more technical. Domi, would you want to take it?
Would you be able to repeat the question, please?
Sure. Regarding the healthcare industry and thinking about scalability, what is a piece of data you would store in the blockchain? Would it be transaction ID based on action or timestamp?
So timestamps are a bit iffy when you come to this. The reason being is the way it works, especially on EVM chains. Solana is a bit different, but on EVM chains, nodes, the people and the actual computers running the execution of your contract can spoof your timestamp a little bit, like 500, 600 milliseconds. The reason being is the chain doesn't fully check this. It just makes sure that it's somewhat on time. So timestamp would usually not be the best idea. So obviously pushing actual customer records on chain would not be a good idea, because anything on chain is public. Even private variables can be read. Anything you've pushed there, someone, if we don't have dedication, can find it and decrypt it. So ID is a pretty good idea if you make up your own ID system. What you could do things with hashing, or what IPFS does. So you could take, for example, a customer file, like a patient data, you could hash the contents of it, you get an ID, and then that's your identifier, and then you could push the actual file either on Arweave, IPFS, Filecoin. There are quite a lot of alternatives. IPFS would probably not be the best. Arweave is best for long-term file storage. Filecoin probably works similarly. Filecoin just recently released their virtual machine, so that would be the area I would start looking for this.
All right. All right. How can enterprise B2B SaaS as PaaS AS platform optimize native blockchain functionality? I would say that's a very broad question, because it would depend on what type of functionality is implemented. Optimize. So from the word optimize, I assume that you have something implemented. If it's essentially not optimize but implement, yeah, we basically have the same process. So we start from two things. Either it's for the optimization of cost for certain transactions and business processes in the SaaS, in the software, and adding some additional utility for existing clients, so it can serve as new benefits. So it's more for the nurturing or loyalty system for increasing clients, so you can increase the retention rates and decrease churn. Or it's basically something to fundraise or something to generate additional sources of revenue. So I think it's a pretty broad one. Domi, do you maybe? All right, yeah. Tina, if it answers your question, then it's all right. Gotcha. Yeah, so I think it's been 1 hour and 7 minutes. We will be sharing the recording with everyone who was present and on the webinar. I would like to say again about the referral system that we have inside agency. So if you bring someone who we can start working with on the project, we are ready to pay 10% lifetime from the revenue that's generated from the product development. Essentially, if you will have any more questions, feel free to reach out to my email, my LinkedIn as well. And thank you for spending this evening, being present in the call with us. We will host another webinar, I think, in 90 days from now, on 90. And have a very, very nice evening. Thank you.